Hey everybody, it's Candy, aka Brown Eyed Girl 69. Well, the last video I made was about this book called Mr. Wolf and Me. And I was sitting here thinking about it. I read it all in one day. It took me I'm not for sure how long it took me, but it didn't take me long. Like maybe an hour to read 113 pages. Maybe a little over an hour. As I read the book, the story started coming back to me. And so before I even got to the end of the book, I already knew how it was going to end. I automatically had that memory recollection just boop, upload right to that frontal lobe to give me that memory. And I'm like, yeah, that's it. This is how it's going to go. I remember now. But then I was sitting here thinking, I've got to turn this book back in. What day do I have to have it back? October 2nd. So I thought, well, I could probably read a chapter and, make a video of it. That way it's sort of kind of like an audio book. The first chapter is titled Jordan Aggers. Jordan Aggers is going to be one of the characters in the book. And this is an introduction to who Jordan Aggers is. But before we get started, I'm going to take a hit of Mary Jane. Alright, cool, man. The first time I ever saw Jordan Aggers, I hoped I would never see him again. It happened at the general store in early August. I had ridden down there with my dog, Mr. Wolf, lopping along beside my bike. I guess he was about 6 months old then, but big for his age, and the best-looking German Shepherd that anyone in this town had seen. The man who runs the obedience school had told me to wait for the fall session to start Mr. Wolf because he was so young. But I think he was wrong. Mr. Wolf was really eager to learn. Already he had learned to sit and stay, even though he'd tremble a lot when I went on without him. After I parked my bike and fastened Mr. Wolf's leash to it, I told him to stay until I got back. I wasn't in that store more than 5 minutes when I came out. This strange young man in jeans and a funny painted shirt was standing over my dog. I noticed that faded blue pickup truck that Mr. Aggers always drove there at the curb, but I didn't put the two things together right then. When you're 13 and not all that big for your age, you don't challenge guys in their 20s, as this fellow looked to be. I just stood there and waited for his frowning inspection of my dog to be over. He glanced up at me right away, and his tone of voice was blunt and really unfriendly. "Where did you get that dog?" He couldn't have asked a harder question. I found Mr. Wolf and brought him home from the woods when he was barely weaned. He sure slurped a lot when he drank out of a saucer. He was that much of a baby. It had been early May when I found him, and it was really still wet in the woods. I was following a little stream that had sort of an embankment on one side that was higher than my head. When I first heard the whimpering sound, I stopped dead still, afraid there was something up there that might jump on me. Then I realized the sound was coming from around the bend, and I speeded up to see what it was. There was a puppy kind of marooned up on a broad flat rock. He cried as if he was calling someone, but there was no sign of any other animal. For a long time after, I kept dreading that someone would try to claim him. Even Dad had frowned thoughtfully when I brought him home. "It's hard to believe that someone would abandon a well-marked shepherd like that," he told me. "He must have wandered off from home." "But there was nobody there," I argued. and it was clear up in the wild part where there aren't any houses for miles. Mom looked thoughtful. If it was anywhere near the river, he might have wandered off from a fishing camp. A lot of families go there on weekends when the fish start to bite in the spring. Dad nodded in agreement. Whoever lost him is bound to make some effort to get back a nice pup like that. You'll have to watch the ads before you can feel free to keep him, he said. And don't make the mistake of getting your hopes up. I did watch the ads, but my hopes rose anyway. After a month or so passed, I quit watching the ads because Mr. Wolf was mine, and I had raised him. And here this guy comes out of nowhere asking me where I got him. A cold, hard lump came in my stomach at his question. I've had him a long time, I said, not wanting to make up some fancy lie that I might get caught in later. The skin around the guy's eyes tightened, and he really stared at me. In fact, you might say he glared at me in kind of knowing it all way, looking me up and down, at my clothes, my new sneakers that hadn't even been washed yet, and at my 10-speed that my folks had given me for my last birthday. I was suddenly conscious that everything about me looked awfully new and expensive next to his jeans, which had dark patches and the bottoms frayed off, and his boots that had something rough on the toes where the leather had been. Don't play any games with me, kid, he said curtly. I didn't ask how long you'd had him. I asked you where you got him. It was my good luck that Dad's friend, Mr. Austin, who sells real estate and is in out of the general store all the time, happened to step outside and hear his tone of voice. Mr. Austin looked over at us curiously and then walked over. Something the matter here, Miles? He asked. Usually I don't care much for the way people in this town wear themselves out, minding other people's business, but right then I liked it. I don't think so, I replied with some hesitation. This man just asked me where I got my dog. Do you have some reason to think that Miles doesn't have a right to his dog? Mr. Austin asked in this very cool voice. The young man flushed and stiffened at Mr. Austin's question. I just asked him where he got the animal, he said firmly. It's pretty funny, can't even give a straight answer to a simple question like that. Maybe he figures that it's none of your business, Mr. Austin told him. That would be my first thought if I were he. The young man glared at him and then at me and then at Mr. Wolf for a long minute. Naturally, Mr. Wolf thought this was the greatest ever. He sat up as straight as he could so as not to miss any of the attention. He was grinning the way shepherds do, with his tongue hanging halfway down his chest and his tail thumping a steady rhythm on the sidewalk so hard you'd have thought it would hurt. Then the young man pivoted on his heel and walked off fast as if he were really angry. Mr. Austin and I watched him climb into that old blue pickup that Mr. Aggers had had since I can remember. The truck backfired a couple of times and went up north on Main, leaving a trail of dark smoke behind it. Mr. Austin shook his head as he watched the truck leave. That boy doesn't fit in any better around here than he did when he was growing up. I never saw him before, I said, feeling a hard lump in my stomach starting to grow away a little. He's Jordan Aggers, old Jim Aggers' boy, Mr. Austin told me. He and his dad never did get along much, and he took off from home when he was still a kid. I don't think he even finished high school, but he came back here last winter when his dad died and has been living out there ever since. Alone? I asked, thinking of what a scary place that Aggers farm would be at night. He shook his head. I guess his mother's there too. She's been in poor health for years and almost never gets into town, but as far as I know, she's still out there. I biked home slowly to give Mr. Wolf a chance to do all his exploring along the roadside. I was exploring myself, trying to figure out in my mind why this Jordan Aggers was so curious about Mr. Wolf. I guess I had heard that old Mr. Aggers had died, but I didn't pay that much attention to grown-up talk. I did remember Mr. Aggers in that blue truck of his well enough. He was a short-legged, heavy-set sort of man with a closed-in-looking face and white hair trimmed really close so that his scalp looked pink underneath. I didn't really know whether I'd been afraid of Mr. Aggers because of the way he looked so cross all the time or because he lived where he did. The Aggers farm is out northwest of town, just off the road where the post used to run in the old days. There are always a lot of stories about post roads, and that stretch along there has had the name of being haunted ever since Revolutionary War days. They say that a drummer boy was robbed and killed there, and that the echo of his drum sounds along the road on certain nights. A muffled, ghostly cadence that warns the hearer that something ugly is going to happen to him. But the hill where I found Mr. Wolf is clear off in the opposite direction. There's no way he could have been Jordan Aggers' dog and wandered off that far. It is always mysterious where strange dogs come from anyway. Sometimes they stray off from fishermen's camps and get lost in the woods. Sometimes people even dump them along the road because they don't want them anymore. But the dogs always seem to find each other. They form wild packs that live up in the hills like wild animals. We can hear them at night from our place when the windows are open. They range in a big pack and attack the stock on the outlying farms. The sound of their howling makes the hair rise up on your arms, something awful. From the way Mr. Wolf acted that first day I found him, he had never seen a human being before. He snarled and tried to get me with those baby teeth like a real wolf. There was just no way a puppy that small could have gotten from the Aggers' place to where I found him. But it worried me a long time that Jordan Aggers had asked that question the way he did. So there we have the first chapter of the 10 chapters of Mr. Wolf and Me. I'll give a little bit of commentary on it. I read this when I was 10 years old, and oh yeah, did I show that picture? Let's see. Yeah, there's the picture of Mr. Wolf. That's the thing I like about this book, is because the book tells, because throughout the book there's different pictures, and I'll show them to you. I just forgot to show that as I was reading it, because I was getting into reading, but yeah, these were all drawn by hand specifically for the book. And from what I understand about reading about this, the author's name's Mary Frances Shura. She was the author of 16 books for young people. Among the places in America where she and her husband and their 4 children had made their home is the area northwest of Boston where Mr. Wolf and Me is set. Aside from writing fiction for young readers and adults, Mary Frances Shura enjoys tennis, chess, reading, and cooking. The author currently makes her home in the western suburbs of Chicago in the village of Willowbrook. And then the artist that drew the pictures was Conrad Hack. He also lives near Chicago and Niles. He holds a fine arts degree from the University of Chicago, and he was a combat artist for the Department of Military History in Vietnam. His work is represented in the Society of Illustrators book, 200 Years of American Illustration. Like I said, I tried to write this author a book write her a letter in 1979 to let her know what I thought of the book and how it made me feel, and that it was my favorite book, because I remember I checked it out a lot. And read it a lot. I liked it. I'm still trying to figure out why, even though I've read the book completely again now, 45 years later, and I can't find an answer other than maybe the fact that I was a child, I was 10, so the story sort of appealed to me because the story is being told from the eyes of a 13-year-old boy, and I remember when I was a kid and I would read books, if it didn't have any kind of like artwork in the book like this does, I would try to imagine the place in my mind as I was reading the book, if it described things, like described the surroundings or the interiors of, say, like a house or whatever they might be doing, and the activity that was going on in the book. That's the one thing I think I'm starting to learn now, is that I'm older. My imagination definitely isn't there like it was when I was a child. When I was a child, I can remember sitting and looking out my window with music playing in the background and me just daydreaming. Staring out into space and thinking all sorts of things without a care in the world. Got a buddy. How things change, And now I'm in the process of trying to come back into that childlike state of mind, I guess. Perhaps that's another reason why I got this book. And maybe that's another reason why I'm reading it out loud and recording it. But anyways, that comes to an end as a conclusion of chapter 1. I'm probably going to make a video for each chapter, and then I'll finally make a consolation playlist with all those videos together. And I'm going to leave it at that. And y'all have an awesome, wonderful, and amazing day, evening, night, wherever you may be.